I'm going to be looking today at one of Jesus' parables to which we do well to pay attention. It's found in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 13 to 21, and I've entitled my thoughts, The Unexpected Thief. Wallace Simpson, the American divorcee for whom King Edward VIII abdicated the British throne in 1936, thus placing Queen Elizabeth in line for the throne. Wallace Simpson is known for saying, "You can never be too rich or too thin." For those of us who would like to be both richer and thinner, these words carry a certain element of truth. On the other hand, history indicates that richness and thinness did not gain Edward and Wallace the place in British society and politics which they craved. Instead, they lived out their rich and thin lives in relative exile in Paris. We glibly say that there are things money can't buy, but are we willing to accept that money can actually rob us? Talking about our attitudes toward money invariably makes us uncomfortable, which is probably why Jesus talked about it a lot. One of the mistaken assumptions we make is that the Bible teaches that money is inherently evil, but of course that's not true. Rather, the big question from the Bible's perspective is, do we control our use of money, or does money control us? That's why Luke quotes Jesus as saying, "You cannot serve both God and money." That's in Luke 16, verse 13. It's also why 1 Timothy 6, verse 10 famously says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." These kinds of statements lead us to conclude that money is not itself moral. In other words, it's not good or evil, but it has the power to produce good or evil. There's no doubt that money has the power to accomplish tremendous good. We know that Jesus himself carried money because Judas was in charge of it. If we reflected only on the good that money can accomplish, we would be here for a long time. The most common things in life, like the house I live in and the bread I toast for breakfast, they all depend on money. On a community scale, our hospitals, the roads on which we travel, schools, all of these things require money. Humanitarian agencies collect money to provide sources of clean water, quality health care, and food for impoverished areas of the world. For instance, we were recently encouraged to take advantage of the Canadian government matching our monetary gifts to provide food aid for sub-Saharan Africa. There's no doubt that money has the ability to accomplish tremendous good. Unfortunately, we could also be here for a long time discussing the evil that money can accomplish. That evil is not limited to oligarchs and drug lords who gain their wealth through robbing the vulnerable. But evil subtly invades our lives when money robs us of what is genuinely important. It's precisely the counterintuitive ability of money to rob our lives of what is truly important, which is at the heart of the parable we look at today. Jesus gave the parable in response to a man who was in a dispute with his brother over their inheritance. The man whom Luke records as coming to Jesus was convinced that he had been robbed of his estate entitlements. In one of his hard-hitting lessons, Jesus pointed out the foolishness of allowing the money we assume will feed our souls to rob us of the most important things in life. This is what happened according to Luke 12, verses 13 to 21, where Jesus shared the highly instructive parable known as the rich fool. And I'll be using the New Revised Standard Version. Someone in the crowd said to him, that's to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. "The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, 'What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God." According to Jesus, even though the man in the parable outwardly appeared to have been a wise farmer, his wealth turned him into a fool because he did not realize that he had allowed his wealth to rob him of what was truly valuable. So, how does money rob us? First of all, the rich fool in the parable failed to recognize that money wants to rob us by making us believe that wealth is more valuable than life itself. The rich fool was convinced he had reached the ultimate retirement dream of having sufficiently abundant wealth with which he could relax and enjoy life. "Soul," he said, "you have ample goods laid up for many years." Tragically, in his self-satisfied state, he was completely unaware that he had no life left with which to enjoy his wealth. This parable reminds us of the fabled question, "For how much would you sell your soul to the devil?" Within his mind, the man's money is what gave his life value. For his part, Jesus said, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Like we are so easily tempted to do, the rich fool treated wealth as a virtue instead of as a commodity to be used in life. The tendency to treat wealth as a virtue shows up every time we treat wealthy people with more respect than poor people. Second, the rich fool didn't grasp that money wants to rob us by giving us a false sense of security. The word securities even has a financial connotation. Money promises to fulfill our need to feel secure, to feel safe. Wealth feels permanent, but it's not. A key lesson in Jesus' parable about the rich fool is that money only creates the illusion of security. Sadly, the rich fool's only response to his economic good fortune was to stockpile his wealth in bigger barns. In effect, money turned the rich fool into a hoarder, but his wealth did not have the power to extend his life. How much differently the rich fool's legacy would have been if, rather than hoarding, he had invested his wealth in those who would survive him. Instead, there's not a single indication that he thought about anyone but himself. Third, the rich fool failed to realize that money wants to rob us of thankfulness. We assume that if we had lots of money, we would be the most thankful people in the world. We're not surprised when misfortune robs us of our sense of thanksgiving, because even the Bible recognizes that it will be hard to be thankful when we face trials in life. On the other hand, we do not expect that good fortune will rob us of thankfulness. But it can. Money robs us of thankfulness when it makes us feel like we don't need anyone else. Over the years, I have known many wealthy people who were thankful, but this man was not one of them. He mistakenly concluded that his wealth was solely a product of his own achievement. If we allow wealth to convince us that we are more deserving than others, we will stop being thankful. According to the parable, the man's ground produced a good crop. All farmers and gardeners know that not all soil is capable of producing an abundant harvest. But the rich fool failed to give thanks for the quality of his land. No one watches the skies more than farmers to see if the weather will be favorable to a good harvest. This rich fool gave no thanks for the weather that helped his crops grow. Farmers understand that all life, including plant life, is fragile. But the rich fool forgot to be thankful for the Creator who ultimately sustains life. Most importantly, the rich fool did not comprehend that money wants to rob us of our relationships with God and people. Jesus' parable invites some tragic conclusions. The man was informed that his life would be demanded of him that very night, and we are left wondering if there was going to be anyone who was going to mourn his passing. The question about inheritance, which led Jesus to telling the story, leads us to suspect that there will have been a long line of people who will have eagerly fought over who was going to benefit from the wealthy farmer's estate. But would anyone miss him? Money tempts us into thinking that it is a worthy replacement for relationships. Our inner reaction to this parable might be to gloat over the rich fool's comeuppance. As we reflect a little more, we can't help but have pity for a man who had no thought but for himself. In this short parable, the man made close to a dozen references to himself and none to anyone else. None of us would dare to place a monetary value on our relationships with friends, family, children, and much less God. Yet this man dared to think that he had all he needed as long as he had his wealth. We should not fail to notice that whenever money gets in the way of relationships, it has robbed us. This brings us back to the initial demand that a person in the crowd made to Jesus. "Teacher, tell my brother to divide my inheritance with me." It's frightening how easily small misunderstandings over money can rob us of a relationship. We are reminded that we are not necessarily good at determining what will be life-giving and what will be life-robbing. The rich fool was convinced that money would enrich his life when it had sadly robbed him of the very life he was seeking. Ultimately, money had managed to rob the rich fool of its own usefulness. As I said earlier, money is not itself moral. It's not evil or good. The Bible teaches that the way to ensure that money does not rob us of what is important in life is through practicing generosity. Acts 20:35 famously quotes Jesus as saying, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." This parable is really a call to generosity. If the rich fool had been generous, he could have had the satisfaction of seeing his wealth accomplish truly good things. He would have found joy in his relationships, and he would have delighted in the legacy he would leave. This parable particularly rings true to me because I have known more than one wealthy farmer whose greatest joy is in being generous with their wealth. When it comes to generosity, we don't give only to help others. We give to protect us from being robbed of the genuinely important stuff in life.